Redditors who worked at Defunct stores, Blockbuster, Circuit City, etc. When did you realize they were done for? I worked at the Discovery Channel store in a mall around 2007. Had huge 30-40k sales days during the holidays. Then come January some days were less than $500. I read an article that the then new CEO of Discovery Communications was considering ending retail sales. Found a new job shortly thereafter, and about a month later heard from some co-workers that they were shutting down. It was a fun place to work, and they had a few cool products, but most was overpriced garbage, and certainly not a sustainable business. That was always a fun place to browse at the mall back in the day. Waldenbooks. When one of 2 registers caught fire, the fire department put it out, but rather than pay to haul it away, the company left it, a hulk of melted plastic, where it was at the checkout. The store closed 2 weeks later. Former CompUSA employee. The speed at which they started changing the slogan increased. They introduced and rescinded a rewards loyalty program inside of 6 months, and they started pushing bait and switch selling tactics in our monthly store meetings. I handed in my resignation the day before they announced the company closing. GameStop is currently playing that game. Glad I left 8 months ago. Worked at a Hollywood video. When there was a solid week with less than 10 customers, I knew it wasn't going to last. Luckily it was just my job for while I was in college. Hollywood video may have fallen to time and progress, but nothing will ever match the high that I would get coming out of that place as a kid on a Friday night with 2 movies and a pack of Twizzlers. I worked at Babies R Us for 3 years. For part-timers, our hours would fluctuate based on sales from the previous weeks. If we had a bad week, as much as 75% of us would get called off future shifts. It was so random. I could have 10 hours one week and 34 hours the next. It felt like the employees were not the only ones living paycheck to paycheck. I worked at Blockbuster. I was there when they started Blockbuster Total Access to compete with Netflix. You add movies to your account. They mail the DVDs to you. You can return the DVDs to any Blockbuster. As soon as they scan them in, you'll get the next movies on your list sent out, so you didn't have to wait as long for turnaround. Even better, you were able to rent a movie at the Blockbuster for free that you turned it in at. It was actually a great service. You could get tons of movies and it was really easy to get people interested in signing up for it. Foot traffic in stores increases. The amount of candy and snacks we sold increased. We even had an uptick in paid movie rentals for non-new releases, cause parents would exchange their movie for a new release and get a couple for the kids as well. Then they started to change it. Restricted the amount of movies you can exchange each month. Different plans had different restrictions on what movies you could get, how many new releases, etc. It became really difficult to explain to customers because there were so many restrictions in place. After a bit you couldn't exchange a movie in store at all. Foot traffic died again and the chain along with it. I worked in the warehouse at Sears in college until 2007 when I graduated. We were regularly running out of inventory and everything seemed like it had to be ordered in on a case-by-case basis. I was the person in the back that loaded the toolboxes, treadmills, snowblowers, etc. into vehicles. When you're running out constantly of your top revenue generating pieces, something isn't right. Also, they didn't even bother updating inventory. I had a friend there that walked off with a couple of big screens and nobody ever even noticed. I heard that they had a lot of crap stolen. My dad told me how Sears had a certain tool set that he wanted to buy, but they were always out of stock. When he finally asked why, the cashier told him that people would steal them all the time. I worked for Borders from 2000 to 2008. When I was laid off, I was working what had originally been 3 job descriptions. They decided to eliminate that position too and dump all the work on my already overworked boss. Called it restructuring and other corporate weasel words. But I could see the ship was sinking. Still miss that place. I loved Borders. I still think about it sometimes. Worked at Best Buy for a while. Got fired and then went to work at Circuit City. I knew it the second I walked into that store. 6 months later we were told it was closing. Best Buy constantly updated fixtures and layouts designs. Everything was bright and new. I imagine that Circuit City looked exactly like it did when it first opened. I worked for a Kmart in the early 2000s when the chain was starting to die a long, slow death. This location was a total shitshow. The store itself was dirty, in an unrenovated and outdated sort of way. My first day of death, I saw a bulletin about how a secret shopper had asked an associate for help and he told her to F off. Training was a joke, and it was super easy to swap up so goods could be purchased for other prices, as long as the prices weren't too high. Not that the dullard cashiers would have noticed. By far the worst area in the store was the warehouse. There was never enough item stock when there was a blow light sale, and customers got pee. But other than that, items were incredibly overstocked because Kmart didn't give a crap. There were huge boxes blocking the warehouse aisles, so I literally had to climb over piles of haphazardly stacked stuff. I quit that job after I decided that I wasn't going to break my neck for minimum wage. The only amusing thing about this job was that Pokemon had started to become wildly popular in the United States, and Kmart had these little Pokemon plushies, kind of like Beanie Babies, that were just kept on bins and shelves. So of course these things ended up all over the store due to little kids. I did cleaning and store tidying tasks, so I really did have to catch them all. I worked at Lone Star Steakhouse. There's not too many of them left anymore, if any. I worked an open to close shift one night, by myself. Had 2 tables and made $12. I started a career elsewhere shortly after that, and 6 days after I left Lone Star for the new position the restaurant closed. The employees weren't told either. They showed up and the place was shut down by corporate already. Did some follow-up research. Last one in the US closed in October 2019. Still one running apparently in Guam of all places. Guess I'll have to plan a visit. Get me a Texas Rose. The Lone Star Grill franchise in Canada is not the same as Lone Star Steakhouse in America. Just found that out. Lone Star used to be really good. Keep in mind I was fresh out of college living on fast food. I went there for dinner towards their decline and got caught in crossfire of their employees throwing ice at each other. This was family-owned restaurant, not a chain, but I knew they were done for when I quit. In my entire time there I only remember feeling like it was really truly busy a couple times. More often than not we were slow, or completely dead. The owner made some foolish decisions. He would frequently give the regulars free food and beer. It was also a microbrewery. Since I was just the puny dishwasher, I was usually tasked with closing the kitchen solo, because me being there 3x as long when 2 people get it done in half the time makes total sense. Half the time when the owner was bartending he would have me turn the deep fryer back on to make free crap for his friends. Hooray for having to stay another hour just to cost the owner money. There were people in the front of house and back of house dating. Drama always ensued. There were people that hated each other forced to work alongside each other. Poor direction from the top down. The owner would allow his wife to wait tables when she was high off her face on pills. Before I worked there she got a DUI and had her license revoked. When it was reinstated he bought her, on credit, a brand new $60 K Mercedes. She totaled it while drunk roughly a week later. I had 2 paychecks bounce. Good wait staff didn't stay. The morning crew for the kitchen trickled out over a few months. I quit in January 2008. It was closed by May. You should have called Gordon Ramsay for an episode. Not exactly a store, but I worked at a drive-in in high school. When the owner told me I could eat all the candy, hot dogs, and popcorn I wanted, I knew he was going out of business. In fairness to the owner, friends I've known receive similar permission. Many donut stand operators have tended to take advantage of it for the first week. After that they barely tolerated seeing the product again, and had no desire at all to partake of the freebies. I remember working at Blockbuster around 3 or 4 months before they shut our store down. My co-workers were all zany and gave zero fricks, all the way up to management, when the ship started going down. The interview process was such a joke because it involved 2 parts, a group interview and a one-on-one. The group portion involved us gathered around a bargain bin of movies, and each of us had to pretend to recommend one of the crappy movies in the pile as if a customer would really be going through that garbage. Then in the one-on-one, they basically asked if you were comfortable working any holiday they asked and if you didn't mind cleaning the toilets. The actual job was a joke, because Blockbuster was bought by Dish Network. They assigned one or two of us to come in and try to sell cable services to innocent people who just wanted to rent the Lincoln Lawyer. I made one sale and they never even ponied up the commission they promised. Instead, they let me keep a box of movies and games that I had stashed. Every employee had a safe spot for their box of the best stuff once they heard the store was closing. The managers who'd been through the ringer before informed us of the protocol. Towards the end, literally everything became available for sale. DVD racks, weird promo character cutouts, and a freezer for ice cream. Eventually I'd come in, eat a Slim Jim off the counter and drink a brisk iced tea, and wait for the hours to die. When the store closed, all of us had a bonfire where we burned all of the crap that got left over. 10/10 best college job ever. I got a job at Sears. I figured out they were definitely dying because I was getting a whopping 4 hours a week, 5 AM to 9 AM on Sunday mornings. Left me plenty of time to find a full-time job, and when I did find a decent job, I just stopped showing up to Sears. My manager called me asking if I really wanted to give up this job, and that I needed to carefully consider my options. I told them that I has weighed my options, and my new job gave me 10 times the hours, and nearly twice the pay. It'd never go into management because I bet saying bulls with a straight face is job requirement. My owner started printing news articles about Netflix slowing down deliveries to folks who rented too much and posting them on our video store's entrance door. It's completely pointless though. People who have Netflix aren't coming to Blockbuster to see that. I worked at Blockbuster, but I quit a few years before they finally bit the dust. Probably we could tell that they were going under when they started chasing Netflix and copying them rather than trying to find a way to actually do something new. Of course, plenty of employees on I Had a Blockbuster swore they saw it coming for years. Also, when nobody could get a decent manager to stay on, that was a pretty big red light. I worked there as well, and honestly thought they had something good going. Back when Netflix was still a DVD by mail service, Blockbuster had the perk of being able to rent any DVD online and return in store. You'd also get another rental for free immediately instead of waiting for the two-way mail cycle. It seemed like the best of both worlds until streaming started taking over. Circuit City. All the talk is we might be going under. Management says don't worry, it was only the Midwestern stores. New England is fine. Week later I found out on the news, couple hours before my shift started, that I no longer had a job. They let us work another month to liquidate but had no keys to the building and had to be escorted in and out. I worked for a Toby Keith's I Love This Bar and Grill. The entire corporate end of that business was a money laundering front, or something to that end. Turns out that the guy who ran it was actually a former monster who had went into witness protection, but continued to run a scam. I knew we were closing when that kilt bag in Houston made it to 95% completion but never opened. But that sparked several lawsuits, which resulted in several more kilt bags closing, and the process continued till it reached Cincinnati. Our location was right between the two stadiums and was in a brand new entertainment district. As this all was happening, first, our heat went out in the winter, and they were never able to fix it. Then summer hit, and the AC went out, and they flat out just didn't even try to fix that. Our last week open was when the Reds were hosting the All-Star game. Most of us knew we were closing at any moment, and those who made tips made out like freaking bandits. The last night was the All-Star game. As we closed, a few of us rolled out one of the empty whiskey barrels that served as tables there and loaded it into an employee's truck. The GM swore we would be open the next day, but had disappeared that night and were nowhere around at closing. The next day, I walked up to a door that was chained shut and a notice from the city. None of the hourly employees were paid their final 2 checks, until about 2 years later after a class action was filed. They still only got a fraction of what they were owed. What a wild freaking ride. Though, some highlights. Minus 42 different managers and no less than 10 GMs in 3 years. The leaking AC unit that had a continuous stream falling for months about 6 inches from a circuit box in the electrical room. Seeing Toby Keith play an impromptu, drunken 2-hour set of classic rock with the house band that night. Upvoting for the fact that you abbreviate the name as kilt bag. CompUSA. I was working in business sales and could just tell the company was on shaky ground. I started asking my customers about what was going on and one complained about low-level IT tasks he had to do. I said I could do them. Sent him my resume and 12 plus years later I'm still in IT. Eventually got his job too. I worked for Waldenbooks for 5 years from 2005 to 2010. Waldenbooks was owned by Borders and had been systematically closing them over the years. We knew our store was on the chopping block because of our location. When the word finally came it was not much of a surprise to us. We even got a severance package. What the crappy thing was, a year later Borders went under and many people went without their last 2 paychecks. I was thankful to get out when I did. It did not pay well but I loved working with books and talking about books with people. It was by far my favorite job I have ever had, but boy was it financially painful. I worked for Kodak in the mid 1990s. Digital photography was emerging, but emulsion, chemical, photography was already moving to minilabs, away from wholesale mass production. Management were always talking down digital and talking up our long-term future. Kodak even brought out a new film format in about 1995, with a magnetic strip on the film. High-tech mate. Among workers, most felt we were doomed, but equally most of the older people, and men who had been there 20 or more years, seemed to think they'd be okay for a few more years. Our CEO used to come and give speeches about how we had a future as long as we did not seek pay rises. He later became CEO of Telstra, Australia's largest telecommunications company. There, he made expensive takeovers of White Pages, the paper phone directory, and Trading Post, a classified ad newspaper. This was with the internet already in common use. He later became head of NBN Co, the quasi-government company responsible for building the country's high-speed broadband network, a much criticized, mismanaged project noted for complacency and lethargy, and a lack of ambition. There are some who want a nuclear power industry in Australia, and the man's name is often mentioned to head that. Our CEO used to come and give speeches about how we had a future as long as we did not seek pay rises. As the kids say, what the actual duck. I had only recently started working at Mervyn's and was ringing up a lady who started saying how sad she was that Mervyn's was closing down. And I was like, we're what? I feel your pain. I was working at Sprint at their world headquarters in Overland Park, KS, and on my lunch break I drove to pick up some barbecue and was listening to NPR. That's where I learned they were laying off 1/3 of their employees and 75% of my department. I work at GameStop now. Hours are being cut, pay is very low and raises are little to none. Stock prices are in the gutter. Holidays are not crazy busy and stores are filled with junk. We are being pressured to sell warranties like you wouldn't believe because it's basically free money. People are being fired left and right for not selling enough of said warranties and memberships. Moral is in the dumpster. Our number one focus is getting people to trade in phones, not sell games, so the company can sell them to whomever. The list goes on and on. Our local GameStop is closing. Was walking by, went in, not much left. I found a used Xbox One game for $4 and the guy checking me out asked me 3 times if I wanted to buy the warranty on it. I'm like, economics aside, you guys won't even be around to honor it. I actually just said no thanks. I worked at Qualix, Kodak 1 Hour Photo, Blockbuster, Steve and Barry's, Caribou. While they still exist, it's only just barely, and they've contracted a lot, Saturn, and a few others that no longer exist. Funnily enough, it was never on the downswing while I was there, mostly, anyway. I should have companies pay me not to work there. Corporate Typhoid Mary. I worked at Circuit City in computer sales from 1999 the 5th of February, 2003. I was near the top in sales for the region. The managers were all made to attend a special retreat in which they couldn't bring their phones. It was previously clear Circuit City had lost its way and was throwing everything it could at it. Multiple store redesigns, commission changes, etc. This retreat seemed very off. They couldn't bring their cell phones. The day the retreat ended, we were called and told to be at the store at 9 AM the next day. I had an exam at Temple U that morning and said no, can't do it. They were extremely insistent. I knew then and there what was going to happen. I cleaned out my locker that night. I refused to come in, took my exam, and got on the train. While on the train, A co-worker called me crying. The top 5 people in commission were let go. That included me. I went directly to the store, handled it like a champ, and when they asked to clean out my locker, I told them I did it last night. Not a store, but a .com. I knew we were doomed when management decided to buy a whole load of expensive IBM servers to host clients' websites, just as the national telcos were starting a hosting price war. Paying for those things, plus running costs, which brought in $0 revenue, was a millstone too big for a 20-person company. We would have been fine if we just continued to deliver award-winning websites and digital media. Overzealous expansion capital investments have killed so many small businesses. I tried to talk a trendy design shop I worked for briefly out of moving offices and hiring a shitload of people. But no, the other guys were doing it, so they had to too. And 12 months later, they imploded. When I worked at RadioShack maybe 10 years back, we were encouraged to rip people off. It got to the point where both our manager and district manager would discipline us if we didn't rip people off while they were around. There were a few ways they wanted us to do it. First, if somebody came in to upgrade a cell phone and they didn't speak English well, which was a lot of our customers due to our location, we were told to change their plan without telling them, since the customers never read the contracts before signing them. So the bosses wanted us to change the plan to a family plan and add lines, or change the amount of minutes data they had, whichever seemed easier to get away with at the time. Then when the customers came back in a month or two to ask about the higher bills, our bosses wanted us to pretend we couldn't understand them, and say they needed to go to another store where employees spoke their language. I personally saw our manager and multiple sales associates do this. I got reprimanded constantly for refusing to do it myself. Another thing our manager encouraged us to do was sell iPod touches as iPhones to tourists. Our store was in a mall near an international airport, so we had a lot of tourists who would stop by to spend money on electronics that were cheaper here than in their country. At the time, iPhones were only sold at Apple and AT&T stores, but we had iPod touches that looked exactly the same, so sometimes you could sell them at a marked up price, add $200-300 to the listed iPod touch price, then split that between the manager and yourself. There was also something my manager used to do, but I never saw or heard of any of the associates doing. When somebody would come in to buy a laptop that had multiple models that looked the same, he'd sometimes swap the boxes. So let's say we have a $500 laptop and a $1,000 laptop that look the same, and somebody who seems clueless comes in to buy the $1,000 one. He'd put the $500 one in the box and sell that instead. Then he could buy the expensive one in the less expensive box, with our employee discount, which I believe was 10% on laptops, which he could sell for probably $800 on eBay or Craigslist. There were lots of little things they wanted us to do in order to raise our daily sales figures. We were all expected to do $2K a day in sales, regardless of how many hours you worked. We were watched closely by our district manager. Since we were in the top 10 for sales in the company, I ended up having to quit because I kept getting into arguments with the higher ups over refusing to do anything bad. But they wouldn't fire me because I was almost always the second highest in sales for our district, just behind one of my co-workers that gladly ripped people off. I was so happy when they went under. When I applied to RadioShack in the 70s, they required a college degree. LOL. I worked at Blockbuster Canada in 2009 and just got promoted to shift leader. That lasted just over a year. I got 3 promotion for mass selling our rewards program to customers, which was a combination of free rentals and coupons for frequent visits. Another part of that was the monthly pass, which would let you rent unlimited non-new releases as many times as you wanted, provided you returned the last movie. I think it was early 2010 when Netflix arrived in Canada and I slowly lost some of my friends in neighboring stores due to closures. Our district manager told us to tell customers we were restructuring and simultaneously made all employees take a mandatory course in graph training which would teach you how to sell better. This didn't help whatsoever and it was a last ditch effort to survive. Customers would rub Netflix in our faces. I don't blame them, as you could pay less and not leave the house to watch multiple movies. Also, the convenience of digital to physical media was a nail in the coffin for the company. On top of that, I got yelled at frequently by customers regarding our no late fees policy. They would get charged a restocking fee after a week and I'd have to explain this stupid mismarketing to them. In October of 2010 we received the letter that our store in Toronto would be closing in 3 months and we'd be best to seek alternative employment. I bought so many of our own stock of movies and games during our liquidation week and never looked back. I still loved the job and the people I met there. 10 free rentals a week and discounted purchases and food was great. Good times. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.